Hey everyone, welcome to the Future X podcast. It's been a while, Matt, and we're back with our audience to align with a product we're releasing right now. Actually, not a product; it's a piece that we've been working on for going on 6 months now, and it really has to do with the mega transition that schools are going to be going through over the next 3 to 5 years to their next ERP, specifically their new student systems. Right? There's a little gap in the action right now as the student systems get ready to accept the next round of clientele. But I think the way we wrote the piece may sound a little scary at first. It may sound a little kind of, hey, we're warning, but there's an optimism to it. We could kind of just set up why you wanted to do this piece now.
Yeah, I think the big issue that we've always seen is that the transition to a student ecosystem, a student system, a technology, everyone makes it sound so easy, and it is so complex. It's much more complex than HR and finance. And everyone kind of thinks, well, if we do HR finance, we can do student. And that isn't always the case. And so as we started to think about it and we started to see things in market, we started to recognize a few things, both internally and externally, that were really impacting these institutions. Now, we're 3 years into Beyond, and we have enough data and we have enough insight that we actually can say, hey, this is what's happening. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to actually bring that insight to the market, and not necessarily to call anyone specifically out, but to recognize that it can't continue to go that way. And let's start dissecting what we're seeing. And it's really these two factors. The one is the internal factor and one is the external factor. And so the fact that it took us 6 months to bring a piece out says that there's a lot here to be unpacked.
Yeah. And let's quickly make sure everyone understands some of the passion behind the external that we point out. Some of the external forces, you call it the bias triangle, right? You've been part of it yourself on the other side, which is one of the reasons you started Beyond. What are the things you want to make sure a reader or a listener or a viewer gathers from the bias triangle part of our piece? What are the most important things you want them to walk away with, assuming they're a decision maker in higher ed today?
Yeah, first of all, we want to make sure that we're not writing the piece to, bash a vendor or bash an SI or bash an analyst. It is for us to inform people that when you are making decisions, understand the perspective that who you're working with, where they're coming from. Mm-hmm. And, at this case in the market, the bias triangle is impacting decision buying habits. And I think it needs to change. Mm-hmm. I think the way that we approach it, we have to think of it in a way that allows for leaders on campus to have a little bit of a filter. Because I think some of the things that the bias triangle does is really hindering the long-term element. So what I'd like to do in terms of why the piece is being written is for people to recognize they have to be informed. They have to be able to understand that they're about to embark on something incredibly large, and it takes some time and thought, and you just can't rely on someone else to give you that insight.
Just because someone has a big name brand and has been around for 25 years or whatever it may be, doesn't mean that their agenda is perfectly aligned to yours, is what you're saying, right? So if I'm in higher ed and I'm looking at anybody in the bias triangle, I have to go into the discussion with them and read their marketing material and attend their meetings and demos and all that through the lens of, their agenda is a little different than mine. They may say they're a partner, but their definition of partner and my definition of partner may not be the same. So let's just go into the process with eyes wide open, right? You're going to need them all at some point. It's just how you go about bringing them into your fold, it sounds like.
And really to do your own due diligence, just because, a particular entity of the bias triangle gives you that insight, stop and pause and understand why they write a certain things. Their agenda is to sell licenses, to win consulting, to sell research trends reports. And what I'm saying to people is, you need to go beyond that to understand what it is that you really need for your own campus and to be informed. The fact that we put the pins out there in the map to show The casualty, there's more than that.
Oh, there's hundreds.
We just showed you the ones that we have data that show it. I think the key element here is we don't want them to be a pin. As we continue to see this market go in the way it is, we want those pins to be less as we go forward.
That makes sense. Okay, so that's a little bit on some of the external forces. Now, you've sat on the external side. One of the things you said to me multiple times when we were putting the piece together was, Joe, it's not that we who are on the bias triangle side, let's say, were bad people or had bad intent. It's just that the schools weren't ready for us. And then there was this hurried decision. Kind of talk through that real quick. Because again, so that schools can understand this is not about saying avoid the bias triangle. It's if you rush into the bias triangle and you're not ready, that is a Bermuda Triangle kind of experience. Talk through that.
Yeah. So when we think about going into this Bermuda Triangle and rushing into it, everyone believes that, hey, we have an issue and we need to go in. We got funding. And then all of a sudden, academic calendars are in place. The vendor needs you to sign it because to get the deal at a certain time. All these factors are coming in. And then they have a random go live because your academic calendar is a certain way. The consulting, arm needs you to have a certain utilization through a period of time. So when we think about that, we know that it isn't a good recipe, and it's playing out. I mean, the next 3 years, you're going to see a few more pins drop, maybe more than a few more. And that's because they haven't done the planning. They haven't
done the part ahead of bringing those people in. And we reference that in the article. We kind of keep saying over and over again, do your work first. Talk a little bit about some of that work.
Yeah, when we think about the work isn't just moving data from one legacy system to a cloud system or an on-premise technology. What we're saying to you is you have business process re-engineering that needs to happen. The way that we operate on a campus today is different than we operated ever before. But yet, if you copy your legacy over, if you're just requirement gathering, if you're lift and shifting, you're going to get legacy mindsets and you don't gain value. And then they wonder why they're not seeing the transformation. And the reason that, schools pause is when they realize the product isn't ready for them. Mm-hmm. Because what they may want to do, that product may not do it. And the reality of it is, maybe that product shouldn't do it. That's why this isn't an issue of do SIS or don't do SIS or pick a vendor or pick a consulting group or an analyst. This is about understanding what your vision is. And if you jump into it because you have a licensing, contract that you have to go negotiate and put in, you're going to build a house that isn't prepared for you.
I think that's the key. I think that's the most important thing we want people to gain out of this is your SI can be powerful when they come into the journey the right way and are brought in the right way. Your vendor can be transformational if you've done your part to bring them in at the right time in the right way. But if you kind of start dancing to their fiddle, oh man, you're in for a ride.
And if your own organization, your own campus isn't ready for that transformation, you're going to basically do things just to get things over. If there's a lot of times on LinkedIn, we'll see go live. Mm-hmm. We went
Congratulations.
live. Congratulations. Yeah. We went live. It just means you turned on a set of functionality over. Mm-hmm. It's when you start to see the outcomes that come from that, when you start to see, enrollment increasing, when you start to see time to degree being more effective, that's when you should start celebrating. The fact that you cut over and hard work done in 2 years to copy legacy into it and that you were able to convert, those aren't wins to me.
Yeah, that's the table stakes.
Those are table stakes.
Yeah.
And what we want people to realize is, one, understand what the bias triangle is going to give you in terms of the context of why this transformation needs to be done and why they think it needs to be done. But you, as a campus, have to be prepared. You have to recognize what you can't overestimate, and you have to think about what you underestimate as the effort. We go into that details.
So let's switch gears to the internal, right? And I think you even said it. The internal sometimes significantly outweighs the external forces of what goes wrong. So talk a little about, highlight a couple of the key internals you really want to make sure people don't miss. Let's say they're speed reading the article and they miss it. What don't you want them to miss about the internal?
When you think about internal, I think the one thing is that this actually is going to require a lot of people's time. And how do you resource for that? Everyone thinks that when you bring everyone together and you're going to save a lot of efficiency in the actual product, there's a lot of work that needs to go around thinking about that transformation. How do you re-engineer an admissions office? How do you re-engineer a records office? Even financial aid. And so if you now have seen it, you started to see that it isn't all in one either. You have to think about the different connector points to it. So internally, there is so much thought that has to be put in that if you don't put that thought, you're going to get just what you've done in legacy. You're going to spend 10 million or 20 million or 50 million, and you're going to do the same thing. Maybe you do it all cohesively in one, level, but you're not getting the actual transformation that $50 million should really give you.
Yeah, one of the things we tried to make a point of in the article, and we don't want people to miss, is that a lot of the insight in there isn't ours. We hosted a couple of think spaces open to the public. We had, I think, between the two think spaces, over 100 institutions represented, at least 200-300 people in various roles in the institution, from presidents to people doing PMO office stuff, right? Who basically helped us identify what is the definition of success and failure in an SIS implementation, what goes wrong, what are the mistakes some of them have made, because some of them are on the other side of having done the implementation. So a lot of the internal stuff we point out is stuff from your peers who are saying, look, if we could do it over, we wouldn't have underestimated these things. We wouldn't have overestimated these things. So we definitely want people to pay attention to those and don't think that that's just us writing. That's really your peers advising you on how best to get through the process.
Yeah, and I think when you read the 10, the things that we're talking about in the one that we said to overestimate, we kind of put quotes in there in terms of what people were
actually
saying.
Said in the think space.
Yeah, and I think we need people to recognize that it isn't just Matt Alex's opinion, Joe Abraham's opinion. No, we're gathering intel from all different places. We're meeting with presidents who are embarking on these SISs, and they're telling us we're struggling. Mm-hmm. And I want to say, no, put the right word in there. But of course you're struggling because you just jumped into it. And what you're going to get out of it isn't going to be what you're thinking. Everyone wants to recognize, we're going to be transformational. The SIS is not transformational. It's the business process and re-engineering that's transformational. And when you start to do that is when the campuses start to really take on. Now, part of the reason we wrote this piece is we don't want to lose the opportunity that's in front of us. There's going to be a set of schools, and we've gotten a few of them that have said, hey, I need help thinking about the student landscape because of the immaturity of the product lines, mm-hmm. the issues of the failed projects before
They're seeing the pins drop.
They're seeing the pins drop. So they're asking us that same question. And so the question that I'm saying to them is, let's start to expect more. That's the first thing I'm saying to them. Don't expect what you do in legacy to be here. And then start to think about what you have to do now for your new student that's coming in. Well, let's think about all the things that you should be preparing your campus to transform to. How does automation come into play? What are the dispersed systems? How does blockchain come into play? Now, if you just want to go copy your legacy over, that we're not a 1990s roadmap. We're not we're in a new world, and it requires a new map. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what we're saying to schools, is it may not even just be the SIS. We got to also do this. Let's not blame the SIS for the things that you're not able to do, because
that SIS isn't even supposed to
isn't supposed to do it. And so our goal here is to let's shed light on what it should do and pay the right amount of money for that, functionality, but then save the rest to bring the right set of solutions into your portfolio that allows you to serve students, faculty, and staff in a much more effective way.
One last thing I want to cover before we wind up this session is drawing people's attention to this idea of horses. Because one of the things that I noticed a lot of people in our Think space say, both on the overestimate and the underestimate side, it always came back to people. Overestimating how much time it was going to take, underestimating how much human capital needed to be assigned for the 2-year, 3-year implementation, right? So as it is, higher ed is a little light on horses, the kind of talent that can lead with conviction and boldness and drive a project from beginning to end, set those clear goals, make sure everyone's held accountable. It's a little light, higher ed is. So then you have to do an inventory of your school and say, who are the horses who are going to drive this project forward? And if you have them, great. If you don't, you got to plan. Again, before you bring all the resources in, close us out with some thoughts on that, and then we'll move.
You know, in our section, we talk about weak leadership.
Mm-hmm. And this wasn't us. This came from the Think space. People saying that one of the main causes of failure was weak leadership at their school.
And that's because sometimes we have weak CIOs. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's just a statement that I'll make. Mm-hmm. Maybe they shouldn't be the one leading this project. Mm-hmm. You got to think about who the right players are that can actually lead, that can bring ideation, that can bring the right solution, challenge people. No, we're going to do it this way. Bring consensus on it. So bringing the right leader is as important. You know, higher ed has a lot of title inflation.
Yeah.
A lot of people are CIOs because they were the next in line. Maybe that person shouldn't be the next person leading your student transformation. It should be someone with a vision to really transform, bring the whole community together, and then drive a conversation. And that's the one thing I say to presidents is, it doesn't have to be the CIO that leads this. Sometimes the CFO is leading it, and they shouldn't lead it either. We have to figure out the right leadership that is then allowing the CIO and the CFO to inform or get the right type of organization underneath them to bring the right team. But you always talk about putting the right people in the right seats. That's as important, but then you also need the right horses. And the reality of it is, and we say this to the presidents all the time, you have the right horses.
Sometimes they're 2 or 3 levels deep.
They're 2 or 3 levels deep, and they don't have the title. Mm-hmm. And sometimes not having the title may be a good reason why they should be leading.
Yeah.
So
that's right. So there's a little nugget that I hope if someone actually heard what you just said, there's a secret there to a lot of the success we're seeing in higher ed, bypassing some of the title inflated roles to find the real talent who can make a transformation possible.
Yeah. I want people to read it. I want people to challenge us. Hey, we're around, right? We want to have conversations because these conversations need to be happening. And even if it's happening without us in the room, we've done our service.
Yep. And even if people are upset at us, that's okay because it's getting the conversation going.
Exactly.
Thanks for being part of the Future X podcast. We'll see you next time.